Rumors and reports of more progress towards political accommodation with the Afghan Taliban continue to emerge. With the timeline for the end of major combat operations in Afghanistan by the end of 2014 inching closer, and the drawdown of Western forces accelerating, the distance between the fundamental goals of each side is continuing to lessen. On January 26, an Afghan Taliban delegation was reported to have arrived in Qatar, where a political office is said to be opened at some point in the future, though no date has been set. By January 28th, unnamed former Taliban officials in Kabul told the New York Times that 4 to 8 Taliban representatives in Qatar were already meeting with U.S. officials, though meetings in Doha have now been reported for some time. According to the BBC on January 29th, Afghan President Hamid Karzai will reportedly meet with the Taliban in Saudi Arabia in coming weeks. This is 2 days after the Afghan High Peace Council, assembled by Karzai to facilitate negotiations with the Taliban, claimed that it believed that the Afghan Taliban was willing to moderate its negotiating stance. However, Afghan press carried reports January 30th, citing credible Taliban sources, that the Taliban continue to have no intention of negotiating with the Karzai regime. Karzai, meanwhile, has largely opposed any negotiations with the Taliban that are not directed by his own government, where his leverage is maximized. There is an enormous difference between talking and serious, meaningful negotiations towards a specific political agreement. There is every indication that what is happening in Qatar is very preliminary. But given the death of Osama bin Laden and the serious degradation of the old al-Qaeda core in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as the Afghan Taliban's willingness to separate itself from Islamists with transnational ambitions, it is increasingly clear that there is no longer any fundamental, irreconcilable disagreement between the top leadership of the Afghan Taliban and the United States. The war does continue to rage, though, and there is plenty of room for renewed offensives by one side or the other. Nevertheless, both sides currently seem comfortable with forward progress towards a negotiated settlement. But the matter is not simply a two-way street. The U.S., Pakistan, the Afghan government, Iran, and others are all attempting to shape the negotiating environment and thereby maximize their influence over the outcome. The Afghan Taliban is a diffused and amorphous movement, including robust, autonomous elements like the Haqqani network, and localized elements of thugs, warlords, and drug smugglers essentially using the Taliban as a flag of convenience. Mullah Muhammad Omar, the movement's leader, does appear to retain control and influence, but his edicts are best understood as guidelines rather than strictly followed directives. Recently, a low-level member of the High Peace Council was reportedly kidnapped by the Taliban in Kunar province, something that can be expected to continue. Ultimately, there have been more signs of progress towards substantive negotiations thus far in 2012 than in all previous years. But progress hardly means any sort of settlement is on the horizon. Fighting will continue even as the Taliban sits down at the negotiating table, just as was the case with North Vietnam. The process could easily take years.